I think it's a great sign of the progress that we are making that there is even a session with the title First Commercial Robotic Mission to Mars. And that's the small panel that we're about to hear from, led by Natalia Larrea. She is the director of Euroconsult USA. Prior to that, an advisor to Euroconsult in Canada. Great background, also including NASA and ESA. So, Natalia, I will turn it over to you and your guests. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. So, as it was mentioned, I'm Natalia Larrea. I'm director of Euroconsult US. It's a great pleasure to be moderating this panel with this exciting topic, which is the first commercial robotic mission to Mars, a mission that is being developed jointly by Impulse Space and Relativity Space, and that, as we're going to be discussing during this panel, can have a great impact in Mars exploration and space exploration as a whole, and changing the ways that things have been traditionally done. And for this, we have with us today two great panelists, impressive backgrounds, impressive careers, who I'm sure that you all recognize. So we have with us Barry Matsumori, Chief Operating Officer at Impulse Space, and George Brost, Senior Vice President of Revenue Operations at Relativity Space. So welcome, thanks so much for being with us. Just as a quick reminder, if we have time towards the end, we'll be opening the mic for a couple of questions from the audience. And now to set up the stage, and before going into the conversation, we would like to show you a great video that summarizes the topic of today. So. Before going into the details on what we just saw, I would like to ask you to introduce yourselves, your background, and if you can tell us more about your activities at Impulse Space and Relativity and what you're trying to achieve.
Sure. I'm Barry Matsumori, Chief Operating Officer at Impulse Space. And the company I'll talk a little bit more about, but myself, prior to this, led a optical communications company, was at SpaceX during 2011 to 2015, kind of the growth years, the recognition years of SpaceX. And prior to that, most of my time was at Qualcomm, an early Qualcomm employee.
All right, and I'm Josh Brost. Is mic on? All right, I'll keep going. Oh, there we go.
You're good.
All right, Josh Brost, Senior Vice President at Relativity Space. You're just kind of giving a little bit of the background of Relativity Space and why we're excited about this mission. Our long-term vision has been to be one of the companies that makes a permanent presence on Mars possible. We're trying to solve the part of that equation of building the industrial base for Mars. We started by building launch vehicles. So a few months ago, many of you probably saw pictures of beautiful blue flames flying in a night sky. That was the first methane rocket to fly from the US. And we're moving on now to a larger launch system called the Terran R, which is going to be part of this mission to Mars.
So to build on that, the partnership is with Relativity and Impulse. And one of the things that we said early on, and really it came from the Relativity side, is let's do something bold. Let's do something that really makes a difference, and that is build this commercial mission to Mars. Impulse Space is a relatively new company. We were founded in mid-21 by Tom Mueller. If you don't know who Tom Mueller is, Tom and Elon back in 2002 started SpaceX, and he was the propulsion person that Elon went to. From there, he has been there since 2020, and then left, was recommended he go ahead and start a company. And the first thing he did is recruited a very capable propulsion team. Team has already developed 2 engines, 2 propulsion systems. And from there, we've done everything of recruiting a really first-class team. I'd say a very large percentage of us are ex-SpaceX or have ex-SpaceX experience, and that culture pervades throughout what we do. So with that, we should talk more about the mission.
Sure. So tell us more about the mission, right? It's very unique. It's a fully private mission, the first mission to Mars. What is the mission about? What we're trying to accomplish?
Sure. I mean, I think I look at the mission from a couple different lenses. I think first, there's the element of it that, as Relativity looks at why is Mars important, it's about expanding what's possible for humanity. It's about inspiring people to take on hard problems, and with the belief that that will lead to benefits on Earth. I think as we look at this commercial partnership as well, in history, going to Mars, just like going to orbit a decade ago, frankly, was something that was only done by a couple of governments. And governments are very good at bringing to bear tremendous resources to make things possible, but it's commercial industry that takes things that are possible and makes them affordable. And really with this partnership, we're looking to make transportation to Mars affordable, to open up the possibility of what can be done in the future. And we see this as kind of the one small step at the beginning that unlocks this very different future for all of us on Earth.
I think to build up on what Josh is saying, commercial is the key word. And you've heard a lot of presentations. There's some great activity going on. But the notion of doing something commercial, and what we're really trying to do is make transport affordable and predictable so that people can do the science on Mars without having to worry about the transport phase. And why are we starting, the title was Robotic, why are we starting with lunar landers and the capabilities there? It's because by getting that transport there, making it affordable, not only can things be done for science now and potentially for commercial, but also in preparation for anything to do with the notion of putting humans on Mars at a later date. All will recognize there's a lot of prep work to do, a lot of understanding of the environment. I mean, things like every mission we will likely have a methane sensor because we're going to land somewhere and you want to know, was there any form of life there before? So the list goes on, but the key is affordable and predictable.
So building on that, so your timeline is 2026, if I'm not mistaken. All right. And what type of payloads are you prioritizing for this mission? So you mentioned methane sensors. What else?
So the payloads will vary depending on the customer needs, and we're talking to customers about the things that they're interested in doing. And it can range from various sensors, various types of instruments, to potentially even rovers. We have several companies that are interested in providing a rover on Mars, and that it will do some missions while on the surface.
And what are your next milestones? So 2026 is that goal. What is still to be done? Where are you at for a mission? So maybe Josh.
So I think there's kind of 2 programs running in parallel. We're developing the Terran-R launch system. So again, a few months ago we flew a smaller launch system, which is really a great pathfinder for the bigger one. And we're accelerating the development of that larger launch system. It's expected to come on into operations in 2026 as well. That's what's part of what's driving the selection of the Mars launch window. But yeah, we've been kind of regularly providing public updates on the latest engine testing we've been doing, or the latest large-scale structures demonstrations we've been doing as we build up to that mission. And at the same time, we're working together on the mission analyses and planning, which is a very coupled activity. And then, of course, Impulse is building the lander themselves. I can let Barry talk to that more.
So as Josh mentioned, we're working cooperatively through design phases, and actually have gone through several already, and will continue to do so leading up to the actual mission. On top of that, at Impulse, we've developed things like what we call the Hoplander. Hoplander is a prototype of the lander that you saw. Actually, in the video, that lander is actually based on the CAD drawing of the lander that we've designed. And the Hoplander is there to do propulsive testing so that we can have that from a crane and be able to look at thrust vector control and other capabilities of the system. If you come to our plant, you'll see that prototype is actually in development already. So there's a number of these milestones we have to achieve in order to get ready. And oh, by the way, I should add, we are trying not to reinvent the wheel. The mission is very much based on the InSight mission that NASA did. It's really important because earlier people talked about heat shields. Reinventing a heat shield is a lot of work. The thermodynamic analysis alone is tremendous. So for us, following the footsteps of what Ames and Langley had done on thermal design is super important, just as an example.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So coming back one moment to the origin of the partnership, right, and why Mars. So as you said, Josh, Mars is a core item in the long-term strategy of relativity space, right? So how really this partnership originated, like when?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's two CEOs that have had a long-standing relationship. Tom has been an advisor to us in the past, that really connected over a shared vision of making this, making Mars possible. I think both had come at it from kind of different sides. Historically, both have been talking about and thinking about Mars for many years, and it was this very natural fit of look, with our two companies coming together, we can bring to bear two very strong teams to try to really make this commercial solution a reality. Which was super inspiring, and it's also something that's not just inspiring for the world outside of our companies. It's a great recruiting and retention tool for attracting and retaining the best engineers in the world. To get them, the best engineers want to work on the most interesting problems.
Correct.
And being able to say, hey, you get to work on a truly commercial mission to Mars done in a short time frame with a small, scrappy team ends up being a very attractive opportunity.
Yeah, actually, that's a very interesting point, right? Especially that in our industry, sometimes we have a shortage of, or how to retain qualified personnel. So that's absolutely, it's a very exciting topic to work on.
I think I'll actually follow up with one other point too. I think in the last several years, there's really been one loud commercial voice talking about Mars, and it's both of our former employer that's been the most vocal about it. But for Mars to really happen and to be affordable and sustainable and all these things, it doesn't take one company, it takes dozens or hundreds. And so you need lots of different people working on different parts of the problem set to make, to lead to a reliable and again, affordable solution. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that additional companies like the two of ours are throwing our hats in the ring and saying, yes, we also think this is important. We're willing to devote some of our resources and our talent to try to bring it to reality.
So Barry, we were mentioning before, right, how designing this program is, and you, Josh, I think you mentioned, is like kind of running two programs in parallel. So when you think about, designing a Mars transport system compared to satellite applications on, Earth orbit, what are the differences? How you approach it?
Anybody that's been at NASA and has done these missions, they will go and tell you all the intricate details that get involved in doing this mission. Entry, descent, and landing, EDL, is the thing. moments of terror as you're trying to get through the atmosphere and control what's going on. So, first of all, hats off to NASA. They've done a great job of helping us understand the challenges that we're going to run into, and they have a lot of insight that they will share with us to be able to do that. But, I don't want to trivialize having a satellite in space, but that transition to Mars and then the entry, descent, landing, that is one of the critical phases.
And Josh, for Relativity, how do you approach both, basically?
From the launch system side, actually, what you're launching doesn't drive as many changes as it does on the spacecraft side. There's obviously there are some differences, but it's really directly aligned with what we're doing day in, day out. And again, I think that the reason it's a focus for us is about showing that it's possible and opening up this constant supply chain to Mars. We talk about like what payloads are important or what payloads may go first. That's important and interesting to me, but the much more interesting part is, okay, if when we demonstrate this capability, you're going to show that getting experiments to Mars is affordable and can be done on every single launch opportunity. Right. And it's very much when you build it and demonstrate it, more ideas will come out of the woodwork about how you should put this technology, this capability to bear. And I think right now the number of experiments that have had the opportunity to go to Mars is so constrained by the cost of those missions. Like, it's very tough to get something onto one of these missions, and you have to hit the timeline perfectly, and then that means that you have to have an extremely high science return based on the extremely high capital investment. And by shifting that paradigm, you suddenly say, okay, a lot of things that would not have passed the threshold before suddenly do. And in science, just like in engineering, humans over time have learned through iteration. No one gets the perfect answer to any science problem out of the gate. You learn by running experiments, learning from those experiments, and then iterating and iterating and iterating. And by making transport to Mars more affordable, you open up that iteration loop that can lead to advances that just could not have been envisioned previously.
I'll add to what Josh is saying. By having science go to Mars, become predictable, it doesn't have to be, I need this payload, I need this payload. There's only an opportunity, gosh, I got to get on this mission, as opposed to, let's just plan according to the schedule that's coming, 26, 28, 29, 30, and just go ahead and plan for that because you can plan. And that the notion of trying to catch the latest mission because you have no other chance to go, that paradigm changes to, actually, you can have smaller missions, but more often and more common, that the science can actually advance. And as Josh says, you can even reiterate the science because you have a chance to do so.
Actually, that's a very interesting point, right? Having that predictability that you're going to have kind of launches every launch window, it's changing, right? The way things have been done. So diving a bit more on that, on your strategy post 2026. So we talked that you're trying to utilize all those launch windows. So what does your roadmap anticipate in terms of type of missions, like looking for higher class missions, other type of payloads? You can tell us a bit more.
I think first of all, as you point out, that we will take advantage of the window every 2.2 years and take at least one mission up. From there, we have this catalog of things that we want to talk to various customers about the payloads they want to have. And that catalog will drive the missions that we actually do. So yes, it'll just depend. Will there be a commercial nature to that catalog? Yes, there may very well be some commercial customers that are purely doing it for marketing purposes, not necessarily the science, but that's okay. That's getting Mars more exposed to a much broader audience. It's great for all of us.
Wonderful. So talking a bit more on challenges, right? So, reaching and landing on Mars is challenging. I mean, the moon as well. So what are the main challenges that you're currently facing or you expect to face, and how you're managing risks?
I think you should start, 'cause I think
The number one thing that all space vehicles start with is propulsion systems. And that is a challenge that we feel pretty comfortable about, only because I started this discussion with saying we've already developed 2 propulsion systems, and we recently had an announcement about the safe thruster, and that's a 5-pound bipropellant, non-toxic thrust system, and that is going to be used to guide the cruise phase, the cruise vehicle, through the cruise phase, getting to the Mars orbit, so being able to do course corrections. That one we have developed, and under your belt is too strong a word, but a lot of ways gone in terms of that propulsion system. The second propulsion system we need is on the Mars lander and to do the actual landing. So if you're not familiar with entry, descent, and landing on Mars, at least the InSight mission, you start with a heat shield, get through the atmosphere, then you release a parachute to slow down even further, and the final phase is with thrusters. And so we've developed what we call the Rigel thruster, 180-pound, again, a non-toxic bipropellant, to actually do that last phase of entry, descent, and landing, EDL. And so that part, we have a long ways done. But that said, even though the thermodynamic analysis on things like the heat shield have been done, we still need to go through and do some of that analysis. So there's still a ton of analysis to do, as well as building the vehicles themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that, again, the thing that made the partnership exciting from the beginning is that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
Correct.
It's, again, taking doing a clean sheet design of a lander is a insane, monumental engineering feat. Instead of doing that, it's really leveraging, as Barry mentioned, the NASA InSight mission kind of architecture, and just looking at, okay, how do you take what has been done before, make it much, where can you make it simpler, where can you make it less expensive, to make this a very tractable problem. And then the goal is based on, doing a kind of redo of what's been done before to develop internal knowledge and expertise that allows you to keep evolving the platform to be more and more capable and do more and more challenging missions. And so, while it's going to be incredibly challenging, it's a much more tractable problem than it would have otherwise been. And that's kind of how something's ready for a commercial attempt.
And once you go to Mars, do you envision as well going, so right now the focus is the moon, right? So do you also envision going to destinations like the moon or Venus or other planetary bodies?
Absolutely. In my case, in Impulse case, the lander is absolutely usable for lunar landings. Okay, we don't need the heat shield, we don't need the parachute. So it's actually simpler.
Yeah, and for, in Relativity's case, we are trying to, further bend the cost curve for what it takes to get into space. Mm-hmm. By developing a new, larger, reusable launch system, and that has very broad applications, and we're eager to take on whatever mission comes our way to do that.
All right. So I would like to dive in more on the opportunities, right? The new and the impact that this mission can have. So we talk about that a bit, but I would like to ask you, so you're changing the way things have been done, right? So really, if you need to summarize what is the main impacts that this is going to have, what would you say?
I'll start with, all of a sudden, many space organizations around the world, they have a very large barrier, and that's the transport to Mars, that they have to overcome to actually have a participation in the planet at all. And if we can ameliorate that challenge by saying, no, we'll make it affordable, all of a sudden, countries around the world can participate in Mars and actually be a part of the science there. On top of that, we hope that our own government, that NASA can take advantage of what we're doing to be able to make that mission more affordable so that they don't worry about the transport, they only worry about the science itself.
Yeah, and I think, as I was mentioning earlier, it's not making humans to Mars possible isn't a one company thing. It's not a one country thing. It is we need as many people who are interested in this problem working on it. And so to the extent we can enable more parties to get involved in the Mars, precursor science and solving other problems, that benefits the whole ecosystem and makes it more likely that we end up with a permanent presence on Mars.
All right. Yeah, actually that links with the next question I was going to ask. So are you looking as well to, or are you in conversations already with other international partners, other commercial partners for future missions?
Very preliminary stage. Yeah. Yeah, we need to focus on development just a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And also talking about, the commercial side, right, of the commercial opportunities for this type of missions, which is a very, very important aspect. So, I'm sure that some people have the question is like, okay, what are the commercial opportunities here, really?
There, as we all know, the commercial world takes advantage of really unique opportunities to be able to promote their companies, to be able to promote the activities they're in. And we certainly will open ourselves jointly to looking at such commercial opportunities, and one can call it advertising or marketing. But yes, that's certainly in the possible of what we'll do in Mars. What's the benefit? The benefit is not only to the company that wants to do that. I think it's also to all of us that want the recognition of Mars to be much more broad than this auditorium or the listening audience, but actually to globally, everybody saying, wow, that's actually possible.
But would you say that your primarily target customers is government at first, and then on the top commercial, or is that a right statement?
I think that being able to bring the ability to do the science on Mars broadly around the globe, one can say governments, but it really is the science that the people in various countries want to do. That's really a very good value added to everyone.
Yeah, when I think about what's important about this being a commercial mission, the commercial incentives and business model are just as important as which customers we're addressing. It's about coming with having the incentive to make this an affordable solution as kind of a paramount capability that we're looking at. And sure, governments are the most likely interested parties for early missions. But again, our goal is to enlist as many companies as possible to solve the problems that are specific to human presence on Mars. And as more companies come into the fold and are interested, there will be more companies that have a corporate interest in doing their own Mars Pathfinders or experiments to help make this possible. And so again, this is, we're seeing this as an initial enabling capability that unlocks a bunch of this. And the exact path through the woods is unclear because no one's done this before. It's anytime you have a completely novel capability, it's tough to predict exactly what the path looks like. But we do have a strong belief that there will be multiple applications for this capability, and the ability to do more science as the first step is a critical unlock.
I'll reemphasize, just so everyone's clear, this mission is being funded by Relativity and Impulse, and that is the funding source. So it is truly commercial.
And building on what you said, right? You mentioned advertisement or marketing as one of the potential, commercial use cases. So I'm sure that the audience maybe as well are wondering, okay, what are really other kind of applications, or even from space organizations or non-space organizations? So.
Science.
The science. Okay, advertising.
I think it's really coming down to that commercial for companies that want to do something commercially with what's at Mars. But for many of the bodies around the world, it's what is it they can do to extend the science of Mars. And it can range from things that are on the vehicle itself, the lander itself, to what may be deployed from the lander. Again, lots of work to do to get there. Planetary protection is, we got to mention, planetary protection is very much in the forefront of our mind to ensure that we are consistent with principles there.
All right. Just as a reminder for the audience, so we're going to open the mics if you have a question for our panelists. And in the meantime, a question. So we talk about government being a customer. In which other ways the government can help you to foster these commercial activities or each business?
I think that the partnership between Impulse and NASA is probably the biggest enabler. I think from the launch side, there's a whole bunch of ways that we work with the government, with NASA, with Space Force, to make our launch systems possible and make them better. And that goes from alloy development. We were the first company to fly the GR copper developed by Glenn Research Center into space a few months ago. We have our main propulsion and structures test facilities are at Stennis Space Center. There's a long-standing partnership there. We launched from the Space Force station at Cape Canaveral. We've used Space Force assets for range safety. There's a whole bunch of different collaborations we have on a regular basis across the government that make what we do possible. One other thing that occurs to me too is when you think about what commercial benefit or capability is derived from this, it's not just about what payloads can you sell to Mars, it's about what technology and capabilities do you develop as companies that has applications beyond just Mars. And in many industries, in the history of the space industry, that the drive to solve incredibly challenging technical issues has had a lot of knock-on benefits in other applications. And so there are, multiple benefits to be derived from taking on a very challenging mission that do have real, clear economic value to us here on Earth.
So we open the mic, so maybe starting over here.
Sure. So this question kind of follows that train of thought as far as the cooperation and, for lack of a better word, permissions that are required. Obviously, FAA is involved in the launch vehicle and those types of things. But what kind of coordinations and regulations do you have to deal with as far as choosing a landing site and deconflicting with existing missions and those types of things on the surface of Mars?
I mentioned planetary protection earlier, and we're already very much considering things like landing sites, because what we want to do with this first mission is avoid those sites that are sensitive for potential life form investigations, and try to land in a place that is also as neutral as possible from that perspective, and quite frankly, also land in a place that is as even as possible. Big rocks are actually not good for landing, for example. So a little bit humorous, but actually very factual, that looking at the terrain is going to be pretty important. And then there's another factor, and that's if we can provide diversity in a landing site to add to the science of understanding what's on Mars, that's even better, because then those sensors will start bringing brand new data they haven't seen, that hasn't been seen before.
And does that open up a can of worms, so to speak, as far as, well, if we have commercial companies going to other planetary bodies, how do we coordinate that amongst all of those various entities? Do you see that as a problem in the future?
As long as we're staying compliant with the regulations that are there, the commercial activity should not affect any of that compliance.
Okay, thank you.
Question for
Are you also thinking about launching orbiters, developing orbiters? I mean, once a lander has landed, if it's going to do anything useful, it has to communicate, and that's all done with relaying through orbiters. And our current generation of orbiters is long of tooth.
Short answer is yes. I mean, we're very aware of the orbiter situation on Mars, and to the extent that some parties want to be able to have orbiters there, we're certainly willing to support that effort. Yeah, I'm all about that one.
Okay, so with also talk of the whole thing about how this is one of the first missions that is strictly like commercial, I was also wondering, also because of the talk about individual people flying to space outside of governmental entities and outside of researchers, but also just like civilian people. I was wondering if there is still, because this is very like central to all of the conversations, is there still an effort to establish like permanent research-based presence in Mars and maybe terraforming it at some point? And is the focus of this mission now mainly just commercial in the sense of being for profit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, at the beginning I would say, Relativity's goal is to be one of the companies that makes a permanent presence on Mars possible. And this mission becomes important because it's kind of our first step in that, actually putting our money against our vision to make that possible. I think, there are a whole host of issues to be solved on the path to making that possible. But yeah, the first, the first people that go to Mars will likely be going to do science, and I see that as being a very essential element of it. I think longer term, there's many people with the vision of many people living and working on Mars, and so it's a question of how these things are sequenced and how do you frankly make it affordable enough, fast enough to make a real large presence, again, affordable, sustainable, safe, all these kind of key elements.
I'll just add, we are definitely not doing anything human on this mission. There's a lot more science, as you've already heard, about being able to support that. What we want to do is enable that there can be more science done in preparation for humans. And if we can do that and help people do this, again, routinely, affordably, we're helping everyone actually get our presence on Mars.
Wonderful. So I know we have a couple minutes left, and we're standing in between the lunch of our audience. So just a last question, right? I always like the last question to be looking at the future. So in general, when you look at space, right, it's a very exciting moment as a whole. So what innovations, from the business perspective, technical, do you envision in other domains of space that you're most excited about, let's say in the next 5-10 years?
I think the most exciting thing to me, frankly, is that we don't know what the most exciting next things are. It's really, we're at this very fundamental turning point in the industry where the cost of access to space has decreased precipitously, making the number of uses of space grow exponentially. And you're seeing, there are more satellites. I think there's been more satellites launched in the last 2 years than in basically all of history prior to that. And so you're seeing this, fundamental turning point. And you're also seeing companies and industries that didn't see space as an enabler come into the fold with dollars. And dollars drives R&D, drives, capability developments that are really kind of making it possible to unlock all sorts of new applications. You've seen things like now, having the SOS capability on my iPhone shows Apple, one of the biggest companies in the world, cares about space as a critical enabler of one of the biggest products on the planet. Amazon, another one of the biggest companies on the planet, is working on the Kuiper constellation under the belief that that the need for global connectivity can only be addressed, or parts of the need for global connectivity can only be addressed from space, and that's bringing in another, very major company into the fold. And, you see this in terrestrial mobile companies as well are coming into the fold with interest in satellite to phone connectivity. And so that's kind of the most exciting thing to me is just seeing how many different applications are coming and how fast things are growing. And the more money, the more missions, everything that comes into the industry, the more affordable access to space is, the more affordable transportation to Mars is.
I'll build on what Josh said. Affordable space and the amount of traffic that wants to go to space. I mean, there are terms that we never used before that are now coming up. Space logistics, because you actually have logistics you now have to manage that drive space architecture, and we're looking at new architectures of how space is managed. One of the notions is a staging orbit at LEO, where something like a container ship, a large launch vehicle, drops off their payload and then distributes them around the orbits they need to go to. That's a brand new concept. The notion of traffic management, real traffic management, is now real. So all of that's coming together. It's like the most exciting time that space is developing. And oh, by the way, we're going to Mars.
Wonderful. So unfortunately, we ran out of time. Right. So please join me to thank our panelists for the wonderful discussion. So thank you so much.
Thanks.